Hey y'all, Lila with Miss Kiss Kreations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's tumbler tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created these cute little drip glittered let's get toasted mugs. I don't even know what to call them. All I know is that these things are super adorable with these marshmallows on top. So like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes. And don't forget, you can find me on all of my socials, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for more tumbler craft videos and tips and tricks. With all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. For this tumbler, I'm using a 14-ounce round stainless steel mug from Maker Flow Crafts. I'm going to sand this tumbler down. I am using about 180 grit sanding block, maybe 120. And then I am going to wipe this tumbler down with my 91% alcohol. This is the prepping process. I do this for every single tumbler that I create. This just helps get all that nasty stuff off of the tumbler and really prime or prep that tumbler for your design. Once I've prepped my tumbler, I'm going to paint my tumbler with this pop of color paint. This is called Wet Sand, and it's like a tan color. And I'm going to apply my paint with a damp, Wet n Wild makeup brush. Again, I use this process or this makeup brush, a damp brush, to apply these paints all the time. And these paints will be listed in my description below. These are from CCDIY. If you don't have these paints on hand, you can always spray paint, or you can paint it with acrylic paints or whichever type of paints you have on hand. So I'm just doing this to get a nice base because I am going to apply some glitter over this. So I want that brown to be peeking through instead of the stainless steel. And if you don't have this color, you can always paint your tumbler white. Once this mug is dried, we are going to go in with these cute colors, Mocha, Latte, and Frenchy from Glitter Heart Co. And I'm going to apply these glitter colors using the epoxy method. Whenever I apply any glitter to a mug, especially a tumbler with a handle, I like to apply it with the epoxy method because I really like to get all those nooks and crannies around the handle very well covered with epoxy, so I don't have to worry about that glitter not sticking to the handle. I am using about 3 mLs of epoxy total. You want a very little amount of epoxy. You want enough epoxy for that glitter to stick so that epoxy can act as your adhesive, and you don't want that epoxy to drown that glitter. So make sure you cover your tumbler really well with epoxy, and then we'll go ahead and add the glitter once the epoxy is on the tumbler. And now I'm going to add the glitter to my wet epoxy. I first chose to add the brown glitter, and then I'm going to add the gold glitter. The reason why I'm adding the brown glitter first is so when I add the gold glitter, I can kind of overlap that gold onto the brown, and then you'll have that nice like brown underneath the gold instead of the brown over the gold, since the brown's a darker color. So I'm just adding the glitter all to the bottom of the tumbler, and then I'm going to remove my turner arm off of the cup turner, and then I'm going to add that brown on the bottom of the tumbler just to make sure I have an even distributed glitter placement on my tumbler. And I'm not really focusing on if the line's straight or not. I guess I just never really do this because I've realized that glitter just goes everywhere. So I never focus on making my glitter line super straight. And whenever it's all finished and said and done, it really doesn't make a difference if you have a perfectly straight glitter transition line than if it's kind of like wavy and wobbly like mine. So now I'm going to add the gold to the tumbler. And as I'm adding that gold to the center of the tumbler towards that transition, I'm lifting my bottle from the mug. And as I'm going towards the top of the tumbler, I'm keeping my bottle towards the top. So I want to add a little less towards the transition than I would at the top. And then what I do with all of my transition glitter colors is I add both of those colors together, and then I add that glitter mix to the center of that tumbler where that transition is, where those two colors meet. And that way I can kind of dull that transition line and make it not as harsh. So I'm going to show you a tumbler that I did, and I didn't mix those colors together for that transition line, and I'll show y'all the difference. It doesn't look really different now, but once you see the tumbler that I'm going to show you, it's going to look completely different. So the tumbler up top, the one I'm pointing to with my pipe, is a tumbler that I did not add that transition to, and you'll see how harsh that line is. And the tumbler on the bottom, that's the one I added that transition mixture color mix to, if that makes sense. So we're going to let these tumblers air dry or air cure with the epoxy underneath them, and then you want to seal your glitter. So you want to make sure you're sealing this glitter after your epoxy is completely dry. So wait for about 4 to 5 hours. And for this tumbler, I chose to use polyacrylic. This is basically a thin urethane sealer, and it's very thin. And this is the clear polyacrylic. I did purchase this from Amazon. I will have a link posted to my description below. So what this is this is just another option for y'all to use as a sealant. I usually use my Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic coating. I love that stuff, but y'all, it's Florida. It's like 110 degrees out here, and I am so lazy to step outside of my apartment and spray my tumblers. I'm trying to do everything inside because right when I walk outside, I am soaked in sweat, and then I come back inside of my craft room and I am just so stinky and nasty. So I'm just trying to do everything indoors. So if you know, you know. It's like being upstate in the winter and you don't want to go outside. It's opposite here in Florida. So make sure you're applying this glitter everywhere, or I'm sorry, this polyacrylic to the glitter everywhere. You want to make sure that you let this dry completely before epoxying. So the reason why I'm adding this to seal my glitter is because if you don't seal your glitter, then when you epoxy, that gold and that brown is going to go everywhere, and it's not going to look like a transition tumbler or like an ombre tumbler. So make sure you add this to the tumbler, you add this everywhere, you take your time with it. And then you let this completely dry and before you moving on to epoxying your tumbler. So again, I let this polyacrylic completely dry. If you do not let your polyacrylic completely dry, it's going to get very cloudy and your glitter is going to move. So make sure you let it dry. I always wait at least an hour before adding my epoxy, but it just all depends on your climate and what you have your room set at. So I'm going to add my first coat of epoxy. So I want a very thick coat of epoxy for this because I want to make sure that this tumbler is completely covered with its epoxy and that there's no glitter peeking through. So this is a 14-ounce tumbler, so I am applying 30 mLs of epoxy to this tumbler. That's 15 mLs part A and 15 mLs part B, totaling 30 mLs of epoxy. I'm going to let this epoxy completely cure for 24 hours before moving on to my next step. All right, so now my epoxy is completely cured. I'm going to go in with my X-Acto knife and clean up the edges or the rim of the tumbler. I do this after every epoxy step, just makes it easier for that final cleanup process. So just really take your time with this. I'm removing any of that excess epoxy that may have been on the rim. And once my tumbler is cleaned up, I'm now going to apply my decal. I found this awesome file that says Let's Get Toasted from Creative Fabrica. I will have them linked in the file linked in my description. And then I found this really cute textured vinyl from the Vinyl People. Again, will be linked in my description. And I did an offset. So I did the back gold and then the inner offset brown. And I thought it would look super cute on this tumbler. And I was right. So with this textured vinyl, it is a lot thicker than regular vinyl. So if you are using a Cricut Joy, I chose textured vinyl and I chose the pressure to be hard, and I did that twice. So make sure you are cutting this vinyl twice on the hard pressure because I don't want you wasting your vinyl because this vinyl is a little pricey. So I am going to place this on the tumbler and just really take your time placing this vinyl on the tumbler. Again, this is a thicker vinyl, so I don't want you to waste it because it was going to kind of crinkle up there, but I just took my squeegee tool and I just pressed down very slowly and I was able to make it work. So just be careful with handling this vinyl. I always tell y'all, if it's expensive, then just take your time with it because you don't want to waste your materials and have to buy more or just waste your materials in general. So once this was added to the tumbler, I just peeled off that transfer tape and I already love this tumbler without the drip, but we're going to add our drip. So I am using my fabric paint from Tulip, and I'm using the color brown for the drip. And this stuff is like $3 or $4 on Amazon. I will have that linked. And I think you can also get this at like Walmart and Michael's. All I'm doing is I'm just squeezing on this fabric paint to the top of the tumbler. If you do get some fabric paint on the rim of the tumbler, don't worry about it. And don't worry about having this like even or anything like that. If anything, I try to like squeeze this on the tumbler as sloppy as I can, because that way I don't overthink it and it looks more natural whenever I do the drip. So once I have the drip placed on my tumbler, I'm placing my tumbler right side up, and then you're gonna watch me bang my tumbler on my desk like 2 or 3 times. So here's the drip before I bang it. Nice and tight and nice and close to the rim. Then we're gonna take it and bang it on the tumbler or on the desk. And then you're going to see the drip fall down the tumbler. And then I thought the drip was a little too thin for my liking. So what I did was I took more fabric paint and I just added more paint over that already added drip. So I'm just adding just random places. And for me, I think this makes the drip look a little more thicker and it makes it look more realistic in my opinion. But if you don't want to add extra drips to your tumbler, then you don't have to. It's your tumbler. You do you. I'm sure whatever you create is going to be beautiful. So here's the drip when it's finished being dripped and added to the tumbler. I'm going to let this sit for at least 4 hours to completely dry. So you want this to be completely dried before moving on to the next step. So again, here it is dried. It looks so much cuter when it's dried. I absolutely love how this turned out. So again, we're going to go in with our X-Acto knife, and this is just to remove any of that excess fabric paint that may have been placed on the rim of my tumbler. I always like to clean this up before moving on to the next step. And now to add the cutest part, the cute little marshmallows. I am using the marshmallows from Glitter Heart Coat, and then I'm going to use Liquid Fusion. This is the glue that people use for rhinestones, I believe. I don't know. I've never done a rhinestone tumbler, so I think this is the rhinestone glue. If you don't have this glue, you can always use UV epoxy. So I am going to add these cute little marshmallows on the top of my tumbler. So for this specific tumbler, I added more marshmallows, and then the other tumbler that I did, I added less marshmallows. I wanted to see which one I liked better. And of course, always add more marshmallows, duh. So what I did was I just squeezed some Liquid Fusion onto the brown area or the drip area. And then I just placed the marshmallows on the areas, either with my fingers or with like a tweezer tool thing. And then I let this dry for at least like 4 hours. I will say the tumbler I did before this, I added the marshmallows when the drip was wet without the Liquid Fusion. So I used that fabric paint as that adhesive. I do not recommend that because those marshmallows are very heavy, and it started like dripping down the tumbler with the marshmallows. So I had to baby the tumbler basically like for 4 hours straight to make sure the marshmallows wouldn't like fall down the tumbler. So this way I found was it took longer because I had to add the step of adding the glue, but it was a lot easier in the long run. I prefer this than trying to add those marshmallows on that wet fabric paint. And as the glue was drying, I went in with my quick coat from CCDIY. Again, this is my urethane sealer. I prefer to add this over the polyacrylic because this is a little thicker and I'm just used to this product. I know it's a little pricey, but I've always used this. This allows the decals to be placed on the tumbler. So whenever you epoxy over your decals, you don't have to worry about your decals lifting. I did add a little more than what I would have in the past because again, these decals, this vinyl is textured and it is a little thicker. But if you have the polyacrylic on hand, you can always use your polyacrylic for this step, whatever works best for you. Once my quick coat and my glue was completely dried, I went in with 2 coats of epoxy. So I first went in with my 10 milliliters of epoxy. So I did a thin coat, that's 5 mLs part A and 5 mLs part B, totaling 10 mLs of epoxy. And then I went in my second coat, about 15 mLs of epoxy, so 7.5 part A and 7.5 part B. It was unfortunate that this cup turner specifically kind of died on me, so I had to change to the other cup turner as you see, but it's okay, I made it work. So again, do do 2 layers of thin epoxy over 1 thick layer of epoxy. That's going to prevent any like bubbling or any unevenness on your tumbler. I prefer that just to get a nice extra seal. And you'll see that I'm just placing the epoxy right over the marshmallows. I'm just making sure that you're not pooling P-O-O-L, like pulling the epoxy in areas. So it's not just like a little like clear part of epoxy sitting near your marshmallow. So just epoxy it as you would, and it's really not hard or difficult. I'm just making sure to get all the nooks and crannies around the marshmallows to make sure it's all nice and sealed. Do the 2 coats of epoxy, and then we'll clean up the rim, and then I'll show you all the final results. So again, my final coat of epoxy is completely cured, and I did 2 of these tumblers. I'm cleaning up the rim of the tumbler with my X-Acto knife, and then I always clean the inside and outside of my tumblers with Dawn dish soap before it is completely finished, and then I'm going to add the lids to my tumblers. And here are the final cuties. Look how adorable these things are. And like I said, you could see the one on the left. That's where I added the mixture of glitter between the colors. And then the one I'm showing you, that's where I did not add the mixture of glitter. So one has more of a harsher line. But honestly, like they look fine whether you have that nice transition or not. So a lot of people get hung up on the glitter transition, it not being nice and ombre and nice and naturally transitioned, but really it doesn't matter because it's going to look cute anyways, right? Don't they both look adorable? So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope this video helped y'all, and if it did, please be sure to like this video and please subscribe to my channel for more Tumblr and craft videos. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.